I can hear something calling. It's calling me every day. If taking a chance is a crime, then I've got hell to pay. I've been walking the streets in my mind, trying to find a new day. Keep on searching until I will find, until I find a new way. I'm gonna say something, I hope you don't mind. It's time to rearrange. I walk round in circles, I'm going nowhere. It's time to make a change.
Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in. I am your host, Charles Wallace, and welcome to the Bear Essentials podcast. As we continue on our journey to build a stronger community, I'm very excited to share with you all the Kindness Alliance, which is a unique free of charge advertising initiative looking to support businesses that share in our core values. Each episode will look to spotlight a different member, celebrating their contributions and dedication to kindness. Would you like to get involved? Just visit the Kindness Alliance section on our website, www.thebearessentialspodcast.com, or just send me a message. And now, a huge thank you to this week's Kindness Alliance member.
Welcome to Family Farms, where our culinary journey is woven with passion, dedication, and a commitment to crafting the finest bacon-wrapped chicken, a timeless delicacy that has tantalized the taste buds since 1974. At Family Farms, we're more than just a traditional name. We've evolved into purveyors of gourmet delights. Join us on this flavorful adventure, where every bite tells a story of tradition, quality, and the enduring spirit of Family Farms.
Hey Steve, how you doing, man? Thanks for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Hey, good morning. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, Steve, I think this is really an important episode that I wanted to have, especially in the way this world is nowadays. And I was really looking forward to having you on. I think it'll resonate and help a lot of people and hopefully get people to pay a little more attention. So with that, would you mind giving an introduction of yourself?
Oh, yeah. I'm Steve Jones. Been a police officer now for my 30th year, actually. I started at Philadelphia Police Academy, worked 8 years at Bucks County in Willistown Township. I'm in my 23rd year here, actually, started my 23rd year shortly in Willistown Township, Chester County. Currently assigned to the FBI Crimes Against Children / Child Exploitation Task Force out of Newtown Square in Philadelphia area.
Yeah, Steve, that definitely important work that you're doing. And that's why, like I said, I was really, really excited tough topic, obviously, but excited to have you on because I think for the people that watch this show, hopefully they hear something here that makes them notice something, I'll say. So yeah. With that, so Steve, I know you were a police officer. What led you to the FBI specifically, and more specifically, the Child Exploitation Task Force?
Like I said, I grew up in the city, as you know, Charles. So we saw a lot. We grew up, not with a lot. And I started to see signs during my police career that kids who were, lower income or easily victimized were being targeted. So in about 2012, 2013, I got involved with child abuse cases, especially. That became my specialty. I became a child forensic interviewer where I'd interview children who claimed to have been abused or exploited. And from that, it snowballed into a job with the FBI. And that was probably because in 2017, I was working a child abuse case. It was a life-changing case, and we'll talk about that, I'm sure, in detail. But in 2017, I worked a case, and the end result of that case was we recovered 14.5 million images of child pornography. And at some point, we actually stopped counting it because it was so degrading and horrible. And we realized that the person we arrested, his goal was for us to give him a statistic so he could say, hey, I was the best that was out there. So we actually stopped counting it. And that was about 2017. And so after that, the FBI was kind enough to put me on their task force. I say kind enough, but it was also, it's been a burden also. It's been difficult.
Yeah, I can't even imagine, like, just hearing that. I mean, it obviously makes me irate, but hearing that, but it's, I mean, we're lucky and thankful that we have men and women like you who are out there doing this work, because I think it takes a special person to do this work. So, Steve, that case, would you say that that was kind of the key in your career that really led you to this role?
It sort of cemented my place, for sure. I was I wasn't looking to specialize in, child exploitation. Child abuse I was studying, because child abuse is something that, hit near and dear to my heart, because you see these kids, they need help, and they come to you. And when they come to me, I usually would tell them, hey, you were taken advantage of, you were bullied. Now it's my turn, and I'll take your side, and I'll fight the fight for you.
Yeah, and Steve, when you mentioned child exploitation, I think this is a good spot here to talk about this a little bit. What are some of the common misconceptions about child exploitation, and that you would really like people to have a better understanding of?
Well, when people think child exploitation, they usually think of people being brought into the country, and immigrants, and that kind of population child. But the reality is, there's two kinds of exploitation. There's like the everyday child exploitation. The kids in our high school, they're exploited by other kids and by adults all the time. And then there are people who are brought into our country and fully exploited and trafficked. There's, I call it domestic exploitation, and obviously the human trafficking that we deal with as well.
Steve, when you deal with that, I mean, how do you prepare yourself? I mean, how, as you're going through a case and some of the things that you see and come across, and how do you kind of emotionally get yourself prepared and then stay grounded through it, knowing that you have this job to do?
That's a great question, Charles. And the reality is, I have to sometimes take a step back and realize that I'm the good guy. And I tell my wife all the time, and I tell my kids, I would love to be able to unsee what I've seen and unhear what I've heard, but I can't. And it's funny, because way back, and I'm going to say back in the 90s, there was a movie, and I watched it. It was called Sleepers. It was about kids who were abused. And one of the characters actually said, I just want to unsee what I've seen and unhear what I've heard. And that line has stuck with me forever. So, you have to find some kind of outlet for yourself. I work out when I can. I spend some time reading, but unfortunately there are casualties to this kind of work. And sometimes it can eat you up if you don't find something else to do, and some kind of outlet, for sure.
Steve, is it ever, I mean, as you go into each case, how do you balance that? Because I can almost imagine, I hear it in your voice, that there's probably this fear of, like, what the hell am I going to see this time? And how do you get yourself ready to kind of go, you know what, I know I'm going to see probably some horrible things, but at the end, I am the good guy, and I need to see that so that I can help these kids.
You know what, Charles, I'm not going to lie to you. There's really no way I can prepare for that sometimes. I go in every crime, when I interview a victim or when I talk to people, I go in hoping that it's not true. I mean, I hope what you're telling me is not true, but then I actually have to hope that it is true, because my whole case depends upon that information. So it's really a double-edged sword. I don't want it to be true, but I do want it to be true. So when I go into and start investigating things, there's really no surprises. Basically, after almost 30 years, nothing surprises me anymore. But there are times where if I see somebody who's a little less experienced or a little younger, that I'll tell that person, hold on, let me take a look through it first, because maybe they haven't seen it yet. Maybe, I could filter a little bit of it. But the reality is, child, I have a tattoo on my arm, and it literally says, if not me, then who? Because somebody has to do it. And kids relate to me. I'm very fortunate with that. So if not me, then who's going to do it? There's not everybody's going to be out there. Not everybody can handle it. Like I couldn't be a fireman. I couldn't do what those guys could do. And not every cop can do what I could do. I know that. I can't do what they do either. I'm not a SWAT guy. I'm not going to run around from call to call like they do. So this is my specialty. And if I'm not going to do it, then who's going to do it? And that's how I look at it. Like I have to almost take the bull by the horn sometimes and jump in.
And Steve, I think what I wanted to touch on, because I think it gets a little bit overlooked, is someone in your line of work. I think we all get to see the movie almost of it, right? It's always the guy running around the gun, right? Like, but I think there's a lot of work that you do that's more, it's critical behind the scenes. And what would you like people to kind of understand more about what you do, as opposed to, listen, this isn't really what you see technically in some of these movies? And also the thing I really wanted to ask is, even though you may solve a case, I don't think that it's always what you would say is really a happy ending, though, right? There's a lot that's going to happen after the fact, you know?
Child, these victims of these crimes, these kids are so compromised. Their fight back is it's very difficult for them. I still stay in touch with a lot of my victims, and I take their victories as my victories. I had a victim. She was probably over 10 years ago. She was a victim of sexual assault at the hands of a family member. She'll reach out to me probably once or twice a year, tell me how she's doing. And, when she graduated college, I was almost like, one of my kids did. So, I mean, I have to take their victories, and they actually help me. They actually, obviously I feel them here, but their losses, they hurt too. And what people should realize is this crime, this is cyclical. Sexual abuse, child exploitation, it's cyclical, because most of the people who are doing the abusing at some point were abused. And we have to find a way to break that cycle through education, through counseling. There's got to be a way to break that cycle. We've been more successful probably in the last 5 to 10 years than we were, decades ago. But, unfortunately, there's so many victims out there right now. We can't reach them all. I know a lot of colleges are doing like psychology programs, counseling programs, therapy programs, and they're great. Just we're so behind right now.
Steve, when in your experience too, and I think people have a vision in their minds of the predators, I'll say, of who they are, right? You just have this vision of, I would know a predator when I see one. And, I'm actually reading this book called Chaos. It's about Manson. And, the amazing thing is, like, I think these predators, whether it's kids, adults, whatever, man, I think they're hiding within plain sight. Is that what you see?
Absolutely, Charles. I mean, there are some early warning signs, so to speak, but for the most part, there's predators everywhere. I work in a very affluent community. That's where the biggest child porn case came from. This affluent community here. Unfortunately, the predators are out there, and people need to be hyper vigilant for the signs that a child could be being exploited or being victimized. And there are signs. They're not fail safes, but there are signs for sure. But to answer your question, child, there is no specific face of a predator. We see on TV, and like you were alluded to in the previous question, we see on TV all these people, and you're like, oh, that's the guy. No, we can't earmark the guy. We can't label the guy. We can't even identify the guy just by how his appearance or what we think. And the prosecution, we watched on TV. I was going back to your previous question a little bit. We see on TV that we get the information, we can make the arrest instantly. No, if we have to call it dump a phone or search a computer account, or those things take time. It could be days, could be weeks, could be months. And then the arrest could take a little more. We could get information today, and it may not be 6 months until we have probable cause to make that arrest. And then it may not hit court for another 6 months to a year. There's cases that are tried 2 years after the fact. And that's what people don't realize, watching TV. I think it's instant justice. The reality is, and I tell people this, I said, if you're going to believe everything you want to believe on television, here's the reality. I'm not going to be able to solve this case in 15 minutes between commercial breaks. And if I could, I'd be a heck of a lot better looking. That's just the way it is. We'd all be models, and we'd have the case solved for commercial, but it takes 6 months, a year, 2 years. I have cases on my desk right now that I've probably been working for, a year and a half, 2 years, and we haven't gotten across the finish line yet. And that actually hits you a little bit if you think about it, because there's still a child in harm's way while we're trying to get to the finish line. Now, we do what we can working through social services to get that child in a better situation where they're not, in harm's way. But you think about it, that's almost a festering wound now. It's been a year and a half and we're not there yet. It's not for lack of effort. It's, there's a lot of moving pieces in an investigation.
Yeah, Stephen, something I wanted to touch on is emotional intelligence. How do you handle, because I've known you a lot of years, how do you handle the urge, I'll say, to doing what you probably want to do, knowing that ultimately that probably might make you feel good in the moment, but ultimately probably lets somebody loose or puts a child in more harm's way?
Child, it's just years of restraint. The reality is you look at that person across the table from you and you realize that they are pretty much the epitome of evil. I went to Catholic school, as we've known each other a long time. We were taught to, forgive. And it's hard to forgive that person across from you because they are usually the face of evil. And it's not the face that we were taught in school. It's not like, there's no Satan, there's no devil. That person is sitting across the table from you who's done unthinkable acts to a family member, a child. That's the face of evil. And I try not to go to their level. But here's the interesting part. When you're doing an interview and you're doing an interrogation where you're actually trying to get the answers from that person, you are trying to relate to that person. You're trying to get on your level. And I've used lines in the past, like literally I've used a line like, hey, it was consensual, right? Nobody forced you to do it. And trying to get on that person's level. And then when that person leaves, you have to pull yourself back from that level. So you go down and you have to bring yourself back out of it. And it's a difficult process sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, that was actually a great lead in for the next question, honestly, Steve. I wanted to ask about the emotional and the psychological impact of that roller coaster that you're constantly on. It seems like it's never ending.
You know what, y'all? We do like vicarious trauma training, once a year or so, almost like a deprogramming from things we've seen. But like I say, if you've ever witnessed a car accident, 5-10 years later, you're going to remember that. Well, we witness car accidents, weekly, monthly, the images may dull a little bit over time, but they're still there. So emotional intelligence is tough. I just finished a book on emotional intelligence. And when I read it, I'm like, hey, all the answers are great, but putting them, into practice it's extremely difficult. The reality is when I walk out here, and my wife knows this, sometimes I walk away from work and we'll sit on the couch and start watching TV and she'll start talking. And I'll just tell her, you know what? I just want like 15 minutes just to watch TV, hon. No talking, just quiet, and it took her a little while. And now she gets it. But there have been casualties in my life. I mean, I unfortunately, I did lose my first marriage. And I know that what I do and that very large case we talked about was a contributing factor. I know that now. I didn't know it then, but as I look back, 7-8 years later, I realized that's exactly what happened, and it was all me.
Yeah, I mean, I can't even. That's something else that I wanted to ask about. That I think we see you now, and you're the guy on the front line doing the work. But as you mentioned, your former wife, your current wife, your kids, right. I don't think we have an appreciation for what they potentially, basically, they're sharing you with society in order for you to be able to do this important work. I mean, what is that balance like? And knowing that you've been through your first marriage, have you now evolved in a way that you're like, okay, I kind of know now how I have to balance this work life and this home life?
Absolutely, Charles. And the reality is, I couldn't hide, and then the reality, I didn't share what I was going through, and I still don't. And I go home and I don't tell people. That's the difference when, if you're a truck driver, you can tell people where you dropped off things. If you work in a store, you can tell people, the customers. I can't go home and tell my wife and tell my kids, hey, guess what dad did today. So I have to find other avenues. And, now I find other things to talk about. I found, I get other interest. I didn't have that before. I would just clam up and not talk. And that's not going to help anybody.
Yeah. And Steve, I mean, obviously I don't do the work you do. I mean, I'll be totally frank with you. I feel like silence is my enemy. You know, you even at night still, I'll have to put headphones on. My mind will just constantly race when it's quiet. I mean, I
Yeah.
can't even imagine what that silence or that quiet's like for you. How do you calm your mind?
I listen to a lot of music, on my way back and forth. I listen now I get involved in some podcasts now. Obviously you're one of them. I do the podcast because to me, hearing someone else talk, hear it in the back of my head. It's just someone else talking and not me, because I relive the questions I've asked. I relive what I've heard. But hearing someone else talk in a podcast or a lot of music, that helps. But the reality is you just have to find that mix. And it took me years to find that mix of, go home, work out, watch TV, and don't get too reliant on other things. You don't want to get reliant on alcohol, because it could certainly happen. There's other voices out there that can fill the void, and you don't want to get involved in those. Obviously, you have to find positive outlets. I've been very fortunate over the last few years to have those positive outlets. And my family's been great. My daughters are amazing. My stepsons are great. And they don't ask me the pointed questions. Most kids, most spouses, they want to know, hey, so what happened? What did you do? Not anymore. They stopped asking the pointed questions. It's similar to, cops at a party. Everybody usually approaches the cops, and they always have a story. They always want to hear the story from the cops. What, you don't want to hear my stories, and I'm not going to tell you them. So it's a little different doing what I do as opposed to doing, what other officers do.
And Steve, I think this is a good spot for me to say this. I mean, we talked a little bit about how the face of the predator, right? Knowing the work you do and what you've seen and what you've done. I mean, I've known you a lot of years, man. And I want to say this for the audience to hear this. Like, Steve is one of the funniest human beings I know, always has been. And it's a credit to me, your mental strength, that you're able to be who you are for the rest of us to see and be, involved with. Because let me tell you, I would never dream that you are doing the work you do based on who you are, man. I wanted to say that here. I thought that was a good spot to bring that up for the audience. So, yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
I mean, I still joke about things constantly at work. I always say, if you can't have fun at your job, then you should probably find another job. Obviously, there's a certain cop humor that we joke around amongst ourselves, but that's sort of an outlet for us. We find things to say. We nickname some cases based on some of the oddities in the case to each other. But we leave the station, that name stays in-house. So that's how we sort of cope. It's one of our coping mechanisms. Obviously, we joke about it, but it sort of masks the hurt.
Yeah, I can only imagine. So has there ever been that one, you talked in the beginning a little bit about that big case that you guys broke, the major case. Has there ever been that case though that you still kind of kick yourself in the ass, where you feel like you didn't do what needed to be done and you wish you could go back and do it again?
Absolutely, Child. Actually, I'm glad you asked that, because that's the reason I do this. One of the reasons. When I became a detective many years ago, I don't remember, it's probably close to 15 years ago, here in Chester County, I had a girl come in, and it was a girl that I had taught when I was a dare cop. She had told me she was being abused, and she confided in me because she knew me. This girl basically gave up everything. Her parents disavowed her. She claimed, she was being abused, and I believed her. I believed this girl because I had seen her grow up. I had seen her withdraw. I had seen her change. I saw this girl as a preteen, just, she's very outgoing, and all of a sudden she started to withdraw into her teenage years. She got quiet, she got rebellious, she got in trouble. They were all signs that something was going on. And then one day she confided in me that what was going on, that she was being abused. And I believed her, and I interviewed her. And then she changed her mind about her story because she was told to change her mind. She was being coached by, family members not to say anything because other family members were going to get in trouble, not to get into too much detail. To make a long story short, child, this case drug out for about 1.5 years before I had proof to file the charges. So that case, I always think like, maybe I should have done this. Could I have done this better? What could I have done better to expedite the prosecution? Long story short, we were able to make the arrest, and I believe the guy got 6 to 12 years for abusing her. But I always think like, what could I have done better? So after that, I actually started to practice, study my craft a little bit, get additional trainings, and work basically exclusively on child abuse stuff, just to get better at it because I didn't want to do that again. But one thing I can tell you about that case, child, and it makes all the difference in the world, is when that little girl got up there. Now she was basically almost an adult at the time of the prosecution, but when she got up on the stand, you get to give a victim impact statement. And her impact statement more or less said, hey, I'm only here. Now my life has changed because he believed me. He's the only one that believed me. And she pointed at me. And that made all the difference in the world. And I often think when I'm having a tough day or when I have a tough case or wondering why I did that, I think of that little girl pointing there. She pointed at me and she said, we're only here because he believed me. No one else believed me. My family didn't believe me. He believed me. And I think about that often. And, that was one of those life-changing events. And I always think about it. People ask me about it. It's probably the high point of my police career. And I've been around a few years. That one instance, it tops any award I've won.
Steve, I talk about this a lot on the podcast with guests, and I'm a true believer in this. I believe that people not willing to speak, regardless of if it's a guy having mental health issues, someone being abused, right? I really do believe that all of us, our silence ends up not just hurting us, it ends up hurting and not helping other people. Like, you start to think, if that girl doesn't come forward and speak, she doesn't point to you, maybe you're not here. And then you look back and how many kids suffered more or still suffer because she didn't come forward. It's pretty amazing. And I got chills when you said that, man. And I'm glad hate that she went through it, but glad she came forward and glad that you continue to do this. I want to get in as we start to end a little bit with this, because I think this is important. I want to talk a little bit about potentially preventive measures and community involvement, because I think we could all make a difference in our own way. Yeah. Is there anything that you could talk to for the people listening and watching about those preventive measures? And are there ways that they can help in really combating this child exploitation?
You know what, Charles? We all have, these inner senses. When you see a child starting to go down the wrong road, when you see a child withdrawing, missing class, totally dependent on their cell phone, a child who now all of a sudden is starting to bring gifts home that don't make any sense. But most parents, they see it, and from the outside we see it. Pennsylvania we were very fortunate. Pennsylvania, they have a mandated reporter law, so cops, nurses, teachers, counselors, anyone who is in a position of trust with this child has to report it by law, and we get a lot of information that way. But I think other people out there, just the layperson who's somebody who's watching their kid, on the soccer field. I mean, we played soccer together, child, years ago. So maybe a parent sees a kid on the field, or a coach sees a kid and like, what, something's not right. That kid's is missing practice. He never missed practice, or she's not misses practice. She never misses practice. She's not doing what she used to do. There's a root cause. I'm not saying it's a sexual exploitation issue or a child abuse issue, but there's a root cause. And maybe, if you don't just sit around and go home and wonder what's going on, maybe ask others, or you bring that, up. It's an awkward conversation, but it might help that kid. It really may.
Steve, this might be something good though to help people get involved. I think the biggest fear is people, as much as they want to help the kid, I think people are so afraid that what if it's not true? What if I miss seeing this? What if I ruin someone's life by going forward with this? What could you say to those people about how you and your team and people in your profession do your job so that, you know, this isn't like you come forward and all of a sudden somebody's in cuffs, they're going to jail, their life is ruined. Like, what would make people more comfortable to come forward?
Child, you know, I'm not saying you directly accuse anyone, obviously. You don't want to say, hey, I think that person's abusing a child. If you took it through the child's perspective, the child, if you believe the child's being victimized, the child doesn't have the courage or the capability to come forward. As the adult, it's almost our responsibility to be the voice of that child. There's a difference between coming forward and saying, hey, I think that person is abusing a child, and basically saying, hey, that kid could be there could be an issue with that kid. Maybe there's abuse. You don't have to directly accuse or anything, but, you know, take it from the child's perspective. Maybe somebody can look into it. Even if you if you bring it to a school counselor, bring it to someone who's trusted, someone who knows the child, because I guarantee if you see it, somebody else sees it too. And you'll probably find an ally out there. You know, if you go to a counselor, even if you go to the local police department, it's a little different in suburban departments as in the city departments. I know the city's very tough to deal with sometimes, but their special victims unit down in Philadelphia is top notch. It doesn't hurt to call, you know, Department of Human Services or youth victim services, children and youth services, things like that. There are agencies to protect the children. Even if you just report it and say, hey, I just want to give this information. Maybe they have something on file and your information matches something they have. You may not be the only person who calls. You know, I'm not saying go in accusatory, but go in and share your information. You might help that child more than you believe. And there's actually like things online too, child. Like Pennsylvania has child line reports through the Department of Human Services, where you can file anonymous sites, anonymous reports on the site. And the National Center for Missing and Exploiting Children is missingkids.org. They have a phenomenal site. You could do a ton of research on it. You can learn a lot just by going on that site and reading some of the articles and seeing what avenues you have as someone who you believe, if you believe there's you know, victimization going out there, you can report it there.
Yeah, Steve, thanks for that. I think that's really, really important for people to just hear that and just open your eyes and be willing to be the voice of the child. If not you, then who, right? Somebody has to be the voice for them. Obviously you mentioned earlier about technology with cell phones and kids being withdrawal of cell phones. What about the flip side? How has technology helped in, you know, helping you and the team and guys and women in your profession do their job better, more efficiently?
There's a lot of people who don't realize that, you know, that digital footprint or digital thumbprint, whatever you want to call it, it's out there. If you have a tech device, a laptop or a cell phone, and you're doing things on it, you could delete it, but we'll still find it. The drawback to tech, the plus side of tech is it helps us. You know, that's how we investigate now. It's not DNA evidence like every news report shows, or every TV show says, oh, DNA proved this, DNA proved that. DNA is very hard to come by, and it takes a long time. Your cell phone, once we can download it, is almost more reliable than DNA, because we've had cases that were, you know, tried and won because not only were there images sent on the phone, the messages sent on the phone, but sometimes your internet searches on the phone itself. You know, we could see, you know, I had a case where we arrested somebody for abusing a child in a school, and the person Googled, how much time will you get for, you know, abusing a child in the school? Certainly, you know, the little things on that cell phone certainly help us a great deal. So yeah, it's great. It's a great source of evidence for us, but social media accounts have not always been law enforcement friendly. There's a lot of sites that, you know, we can send search warrants to. They take forever. As part of the delay I was talking about before. If I need to go into, and I don't want to name the social media sites, but if I want to go into certain accounts, I could send the due process over to them, but it doesn't mean I'm going to get it. And when I do get it, it's sometimes they restrict it. So it's very hard to deal with those sites. So the phone itself is more evidentiary than the social media pages sometimes. And Snapchat is a nightmare. I'm not going to lie to you. Snapchat, I tell parents of preteens and young adults whose children use Snapchat, you have to be vigilant on that. You have to get your kids' phones. There's no reason as an adult, if you have a child in their teenage years that you don't have the passcode for your child's phone, you pay the bill. And I've told people that many times. I had a woman come in with a 10-year-old child, and she says, I think my son's doing something on his phone. Well, I said, did you check? No, he won't give me the passcode. You're the adult, you're the parent. There's no reason for your preteen child or your teenage child not to share their password with you unless they're doing something they shouldn't be doing.
Yeah. Yeah, man. I think for parents and, for us now with older kids, right? We still find ourselves in issues, but definitely not what I feel like parents of younger kids are going through today. Like, Steve, we managed to find ourselves in enough, fun situations without technology. I can't even imagine if us knuckleheads were running around back in the day with the advantages of the technology that kids have today, man. We may not be sitting here today, quite frankly.
It's funny because our parents used to call it good, clean fun back in the day. Now we realize it was good, clean fun, apparently,
Yeah, it really was, man. Little dangerous probably sometimes for us that we look back on, but hey, what, jumping over, do you remember when the neighborhood, there would be a dig site or something?
Yep.
Man, you could make tons of games there, jumping over 10-foot ditches.
Why we made ramps with boards with nails in it and stuff like that,
Yeah, and let's see how many people you lay down, and we'll see how many guys we can jump over on our bike. And you never want to be the guy on the very end because that guy was usually going to get it. But
he's going to tire track. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, listen, man, it's been great having you on here. I think really, really great information, man. And I meant what I said, man. I know we've been friends, but honestly, I mean this. What you do is needed, and it's really important work, man. And I hope that the folks listening and watching really take something from this, and just pay a little more attention, people. Like, doesn't take a lot. It's like Steve said, small signs here and there, but you can make a difference. Steve, in general, you mentioned it a little bit, but if somebody does suspect something, whether it's around this area or, in another area, what's a way they could kind of go about making the first steps to trying to help that child?
You know what, child? I would tell them to approach another adult that, who knows that child well, be it a school therapist, school teacher, principal at the school if they're still in school, and make that person aware. It's like, hey, it doesn't hurt to say, I noticed difference in little Joey. He's acted differently. I'm not saying anything's happening, but I'm just concerned. And that's where it is. And I would tell it to somebody who sees the child more than you do. So that's why I say a teacher or a counselor. I'm not saying run right to the police department, but make that other person aware. Because that teacher, that principal, I have an open line of communication with the principals in my school district. They call me constantly, as do many of my friends. If you know a police officer, you can actually ask them for their opinion too. Hey, I always take my calls from my friends. I have no problem with that, and most cops will.
Yeah, man. I think it's really, really important, man, because, it's, even now with the podcast, some of the people I'll have on as adults hearing about the trauma as a child that got them to this point as adults, I just had a gentleman on, man, Steve, he was abused by a Boy Scout leader, and
I saw
took them to the edge of a bridge, right, man? Like, this is the stuff that we need to help these kids with, man. Like, don't let these evil individuals steal their innocence. We need to be their voice.
That's a good point. Think about this. You're afraid to come forward and give information on a kid. That kid could be potentially 6 months or 6 years or whenever down there standing on that bridge because we didn't share that information. It's a tough pill to swallow, but it's true. Years ago, Charlie, and you know this, who would have ever thought that the kids were getting abused in the church or the kids were being abused here? Nobody ever believed that.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe somebody could have came forward at that time and said something. Maybe there was somebody who was suspicious. Maybe someone who could prevented all of that from going down. I don't know. I'm just, I'm spitballing here.
Yeah, man, it's so true, man. And I think, it just listen, I think I'm somewhat of a cynical person by nature. I think you are too, but I think that served us well growing up where we grew up. And I think more people need to be like that. It'll lead to more vigilance, and I think it'll help a lot of kids, man. Well, listen, Steve, thanks again for everybody listening and watching. I hope you can appreciate what individuals like Steve go through on a daily basis to ensure the safety of our most valuable resources, our children. So, Steve, thanks again. And thanks everybody for listening and watching. Appreciate it. Take care. Bye.
Thanks, John.
This has been the Bear Essentials. Thanks for listening. And remember, never hibernate on your goals.